Detective Lisa Rodriguez clicked her heels against the marble floor of the downtown courthouse. Her expensive black suit fit perfectly, and her badge gleamed under the bright lights. She had been a police officer for 12 years, and today was supposed to be just another routine hearing. 3 people had filed complaints against her, claiming she used too much force during arrests. Lisa wasn't worried at all. She knew how these things worked. Her lawyer was one of the best in the city. Her police union representative had her back. And most importantly, she had friends in high places who would make sure nothing serious happened to her career. These hearings were just paperwork, something the department had to do to keep the public happy. As Lisa waited in the hallway outside the courtroom, she noticed a man sitting quietly on one of the wooden benches. He looked like he was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. His gray suit was clean but definitely not expensive. The fabric looked worn around the edges, and his black shoes had clearly seen better days. He was reading through a thick folder of papers, making notes with a simple blue pen. Lisa barely gave him a second glance. The courthouse was always full of people like him. Clerks, paralegals, maybe some low-level government worker trying to look important. She had more pressing things to think about, like making sure her story was straight and her witnesses were ready. The man looked up from his papers and made eye contact with Lisa. He stood up slowly and walked over to where she was standing. His movements were careful and measured, like someone who thought before he acted. "Excuse me," he said in a quiet voice. "Are you Detective Rodriguez?" Lisa looked at him with mild annoyance. She was busy scrolling through messages on her phone, trying to coordinate with her lawyer. "Yeah, that's me. What do you want?" The man smiled politely. "I'm Robert Chen. I'll be observing your hearing today if that's all right." Lisa finally looked up from her phone. "Observing? And you are exactly what, Mr. Chen?" "I work downtown," Robert said simply. "I review cases like yours from time to time." Lisa let out a short laugh. "Great. Another nobody trying to make himself feel important by going after real cops." She looked Robert up and down, taking in his unremarkable appearance and modest clothing. "Let me guess, you're some kind of desk jockey who's never spent a day on the streets, right?" Robert didn't seem bothered by her attitude. "I've seen my share of police work over the years." "Sure you have," Lisa said, rolling her eyes. "Look, Mr. Chen, I don't know what kind of agenda you're pushing, but you're wasting your time here. These complaints are garbage, filed by people who were mad they got arrested for breaking the law." "My record speaks for itself," Robert nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sure it does. How long have you been with the department, Detective Rodriguez?" 12 years, Lisa said proudly. 12 years of keeping dangerous people off the streets while guys like you sit in air-conditioned offices and criticize how we do our jobs." "That's quite a long time," Robert said. "You must have seen a lot of changes in how things are done." Lisa was starting to get irritated. This nobody was asking too many questions, and his calm tone was somehow more annoying than if he had been argumentative. "Listen, I don't have time for small talk. I have a hearing to get through, and then I have real police work to get back to." Robert simply nodded and returned to his seat. Lisa watched him for a moment, then shook her head and went back to her phone. Some people just didn't understand what real police work was about. The courtroom doors opened, and Lisa's lawyer, James Patterson, emerged. He was a sharp-dressed man in his 60s who specialized in defending police officers. He had never lost a case like this, and Lisa was confident he wouldn't start today. "Ready for this?" James asked with a confident smile. "More than ready," Lisa replied. "Let's get this joke over with." They walked into the courtroom together. Lisa noticed that Robert Chen had followed them in and taken a seat in the back row. He was still reviewing his papers, occasionally looking up to watch the proceedings. The hearing officer, Judge Williams, called the session to order. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who had been handling police disciplinary cases for over a decade. Lisa had appeared before her twice before and knew she was fair but no pushover. "We're here today to review complaints filed against Detective Lisa Rodriguez," Judge Williams announced. 3 separate citizens have filed formal complaints alleging excessive force and improper conduct during arrests. "Detective Rodriguez, how do you plead to these charges?" Lisa stood up straight. "Not guilty to all charges, Your Honor. These complaints are completely without merit." James Patterson stood up next to her. "Your Honor, Detective Rodriguez has served this city with distinction for 12 years. She has commendations for bravery and has put numerous dangerous criminals behind bars. These complaints come from individuals who were lawfully arrested and are simply trying to avoid the consequences of their criminal behavior. The first complainant was called to testify. Thomas Wright was a 28-year-old construction worker who had been arrested during a traffic stop 6 months earlier. He looked nervous as he approached the witness stand. "Mr. Wright," the prosecutor began, "please tell us what happened on the night of March 15th. Thomas cleared his throat. "I was driving home from work when Detective Rodriguez pulled me over. She said I was speeding, but I wasn't going more than the speed limit. When I tried to explain that I was just trying to get home to my family, she became very aggressive." "Can you be more specific about what you mean by aggressive?" the prosecutor asked. "She started yelling at me, telling me to shut up and stop making excuses. When I reached for my wallet to get my license, she grabbed my arm really hard and yanked me out of the car. She threw me against the hood and put handcuffs on me so tight they left marks on my wrists for days." Lisa leaned over to her lawyer. "This guy is lying through his teeth," she whispered. "He was completely uncooperative and potentially dangerous. I followed proper procedure." James Patterson nodded and made notes for his cross-examination. Lisa glanced back at Robert Chen, who was writing something down in his folder. His expression was unreadable, but something about his intense focus made her uncomfortable. The testimony continued for an hour. 2 more complainants told similar stories about Lisa's behavior during their arrests. All 3 claimed she had used unnecessary force and treated them with disrespect and hostility. When it was time for Lisa's defense, James Patterson called several character witnesses. Her sergeant spoke about her dedication to the job. A fellow detective testified about her bravery during a dangerous arrest. Her union representative talked about her clean record and the challenges police officers face every day. Lisa felt confident as she listened to the glowing testimonials. These people understood what real police work was like. They knew that sometimes you had to be firm with criminals who didn't want to cooperate. But throughout the entire proceeding, she kept noticing Robert Chen in the back of the room. He never stopped taking notes, and occasionally she would see him shake his head slightly or raise an eyebrow at something that was said. His quiet attention was starting to get under her skin. During a brief recess, Lisa decided to confront him directly. She walked to the back of the courtroom where he was sitting. "Having fun back here?" she asked sarcastically. Robert looked up from his notes. "It's been very educational, Detective Rodriguez." "I bet it has. Let me ask you something, Mr. Chen. Have you ever had to deal with a criminal who was high on drugs and trying to fight you? Have you ever had to make a split-second decision that could mean the difference between going home to your family or ending up in the hospital?" Robert considered her question carefully. "I've seen the results of many such situations over the years." "That's what I thought," Lisa said. "You've seen the results, but you've never been in the situation yourself. It's easy to sit back and judge when you don't have to put your life on the line every day." Robert stood up slowly. Despite his unremarkable appearance, there was something about his presence that commanded respect. "Detective Rodriguez, in your 12 years on the force, have you ever questioned an order from a superior officer?" The question caught Lisa off guard. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one," Robert replied. "Have you ever been given an order that you felt was wrong or inappropriate?" Lisa felt defensive. "Real cops follow the chain of command, Mr. Chen. We don't have the luxury of second-guessing every decision when people's lives are on the line. We do what needs to be done to protect the public, even if desk jockeys like you don't understand the realities of police work." Robert nodded slowly. "I see. And do you believe that following orders always justifies the methods used?" "I believe in doing whatever it takes to keep dangerous criminals off the streets," Lisa said firmly. "If that makes some people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not mine." Robert made another note in his folder. "Thank you for clarifying your position, Detective Rodriguez." Something about his tone made Lisa feel uneasy, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. She returned to her seat as the hearing resumed, but she found herself glancing back at Robert Chen throughout the rest of the proceedings. The hearing concluded with Judge Williams announcing that she would review all the testimony and evidence before making her decision. Lisa felt confident as she left the courtroom with her lawyer. The complainants had no real evidence and her character witnesses had been impressive. As she walked toward the exit, she passed Robert Chen one more time. He was packing up his papers and preparing to leave. "Good luck with your decision, Detective Rodriguez," he said quietly. Lisa stopped and looked at him. What decision? Whether to tell the truth or continue down the path you're on, Robert replied. It's still not too late to make the right choice, Lisa laughed. The right choice? The only choice I'm making is whether to file a complaint about some nobody interfering with official police business. Robert smiled sadly. I hope you reconsider, Detective Rodriguez. For everyone's sake. Lisa shook her head and walked away, muttering under her breath about bureaucrats and troublemakers. She had no idea that her encounter with this quiet, unremarkable man was about to change her life forever. 2 weeks after the hearing, Lisa Rodriguez was feeling pretty good about her situation. Judge Williams hadn't announced her decision yet, but Lisa wasn't worried. These things always took time, and she was confident that her lawyer and character witnesses had made a strong case. She was sitting at her desk at the precinct, finishing up paperwork from a burglary case, when her partner, Detective Mike Torres, walked over with a concerned look on his face. Hey, Lisa, did you hear about the guy who's been asking questions around the neighborhood where you made those arrests? Lisa looked up from her computer. What guy? Some investigator or something. Mrs. Patterson from the corner store said he came by yesterday asking about that traffic stop you made back in March. You know, the one with Thomas Wright. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. What did he look like? Middle-aged Asian guy, gray suit, very polite. Mrs. Patterson said he seemed really thorough, asking about what she saw and if she had any security camera footage from that night. Lisa's mind immediately went to Robert Chen. That nobody from the courthouse was still sticking his nose where it didn't belong. Did he show any identification? Mrs. Patterson said he had some kind of badge, but she couldn't remember exactly what agency it was from. She said he seemed legitimate, though. Lisa stood up quickly. Mike, I need you to do me a favor. Can you drive by that area and see if anyone else has been talking to this guy? Find out what he's been asking about. Mike looked puzzled. Sure, but why are you so worried? If your arrests were clean, what's the problem? It's not about whether they were clean, Lisa said, grabbing her jacket. It's about some desk jockey trying to make a name for himself by going after real cops. These bureaucrats don't understand street policing, and they'll twist anything to make us look bad. Mike nodded, though he still looked uncertain. All right, I'll check it out and let you know what I find. Lisa spent the rest of the day feeling on edge. She couldn't concentrate on her work, and every time her phone rang, she worried it might be bad news about the hearing or this mysterious investigator. That evening, she decided to drive by the area where she had arrested Thomas Wright. She wanted to see for herself if anyone had been asking questions. As she cruised slowly down the street, she noticed that several businesses had security cameras. She had never thought about that before. She pulled over and walked into Patterson's corner store. Mrs. Patterson was an elderly woman who had run the store for over 20 years. Lisa had bought coffee there many times over the years. Detective Rodriguez, Mrs. Patterson said with a smile. How are you doing? I'm fine, thanks. I heard someone was by here asking about one of my arrests. Can you tell me what he wanted to know? Mrs. Patterson's expression became more serious. Oh yes, very nice man. Very professional. He said he was reviewing some cases and wanted to know if I saw anything unusual on March 15th. And what did you tell him? Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. Well, I told him the truth. I said I saw you pull over that young man and it looked like things got pretty heated pretty quickly. Lisa felt her heart start to race. What do you mean by heated? Detective, I've been in this neighborhood for a long time. I've seen a lot of traffic stops. This one seemed more aggressive than most. The young man didn't seem to be resisting or causing trouble, but you seemed very angry with him. Lisa forced herself to stay calm. Mrs. Patterson, police work sometimes looks rough to people who aren't trained in law enforcement. That man was potentially dangerous, and I had to take appropriate precautions to protect myself and the public. Mrs. Patterson nodded, but she didn't look convinced. The investigator also asked about my security cameras. Lisa's blood went cold. Your security cameras? Yes, I have 2 of them. One pointing toward the street, one inside the store. The one pointing toward the street would have captured your traffic stop that night. And did you give him the footage? He asked for it, and I said I would need to check with my son who handles the technical stuff. He left his card and said he would come back. Lisa's mind was racing. Security camera footage could be a problem. She remembered being more forceful with Thomas Wright than she had admitted in the hearing. If there was video evidence of exactly what happened, it could contradict her testimony. Mrs. Patterson, you don't have to give that footage to just anyone who asks for it. You should make sure they have proper legal authority, like a warrant. Mrs. Patterson looked confused, but he seemed like a legitimate investigator. He had official identification and everything. There are a lot of people who pretend to be investigators, Lisa said. You should be careful about who you trust with sensitive information like security footage. Lisa left the store feeling more worried than before. She drove to 2 other businesses on the block and had similar conversations with the owners. Both had been visited by the same investigator, and both had security cameras that might have captured parts of her arrests. Over the next few days, Lisa tried to find out more about Robert Chen. She called contacts at different city departments, but nobody seemed to know who he was or what agency he worked for. When she described him to other officers, nobody recognized him. Her lawyer, James Patterson, was also having trouble getting information. It's strange, he told Lisa during a phone call. Usually we can find out who's conducting investigations pretty easily. But this Robert Chen guy doesn't seem to be listed anywhere in the usual directories. What does that mean? Lisa asked. It could mean he's working for a federal agency, or maybe he's some kind of special investigator. Either way, it's not good news for us. Lisa's worry turned to anger. Someone was playing games with her career and she didn't like it. She decided to be more proactive about protecting herself. She started by calling her union representative, Tony Martinez. Tony had been defending police officers for 15 years and knew all the tricks that investigators used. Tony, I need you to find out everything you can about a guy named Robert Chen. He's been asking questions about my cases, and I want to know who he works for and what his authority is. I'll see what I can dig up, Tony said. In the meantime, you should be careful about what you say to anyone. If there's a serious investigation going on, anything you say could be used against you later. Lisa also reached out to some of her contacts in other departments. She had friends in narcotics, detective division, and even a couple of people who worked downtown in administration. She asked all of them to keep their ears open for any information about Robert Chen or any investigations involving her name. But every inquiry came back with the same result. Nobody knew anything about Robert Chen. Meanwhile, the investigation seemed to be expanding. Mike Torres told her that the same investigator had been asking questions about 2 other arrests she had made in the past year. Business owners and witnesses were being interviewed and security footage was being collected. Lisa, what's really going on here? Mike asked one afternoon. This isn't just about those 3 complaints anymore. Someone is looking at your entire arrest record. Lisa felt trapped. She couldn't find out who was investigating her or what evidence they had, but it was clear that the investigation was much more serious than she had initially thought. She decided to take matters into her own hands. That evening, she drove back to Patterson's corner store. She wanted to see if she could convince Mrs. Patterson not to cooperate with the investigation. Mrs. Patterson, she said when she found the elderly woman restocking shelves, I wanted to talk to you about that investigator who came by. Oh, he actually came back today, Mrs. Patterson said. Very nice man. He explained that he's reviewing police procedures to make sure everything is being done properly. Lisa's heart sank. He came back today? Did you give him the security footage? Yes, my son helped me copy the files for him. The investigator was very grateful and said it would help him understand exactly what happened that night. Lisa felt like the walls were closing in around her. The security footage would show exactly how she had handled the traffic stop, and she knew it wouldn't match the version of events she had given in the hearing. Mrs. Patterson, did he say anything else about his investigation? He asked me if I had noticed any patterns in how police officers conduct traffic stops in this neighborhood. He said he was looking at several different cases, not just yours. This was getting worse by the minute. The investigation wasn't just about her 3 complaints. It was about multiple arrests and potentially other officers as well. Lisa left the store and sat in her car for a long time, trying to figure out her next move. She couldn't identify the investigator. She couldn't stop the investigation. And she couldn't control what witnesses were telling him. For the first time since the hearing had started, Lisa began to wonder if she might actually be in serious trouble. The nobody in the gray suit was turning out to be much more dangerous than she had imagined. She pulled out her phone and called James Patterson. James, we need to meet first thing tomorrow morning. This thing is bigger than we thought. How much bigger? Her lawyer asked. Lisa looked at Patterson's corner store where the security camera was still recording everything that happened on the street. I think we might need to start talking about damage control instead of just fighting the charges. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, James spoke. Lisa, is there anything about these arrests that you haven't told me? Anything that might look bad if it came to light? Lisa closed her eyes and thought about all the shortcuts she had taken over the years. All the times she had bent the rules to make arrests stick. All the reports she had written that didn't quite match what had really happened. James, she said quietly, I think we need to assume that everything is going to come to light. The question is what we do about it. As she drove home that night, Lisa couldn't shake the image of Robert Chen sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, taking notes and watching everything with those careful, intelligent eyes. She had dismissed him as a nobody, but it was becoming clear that she had made a very serious mistake in judgment. The real question was, just how serious would that mistake turn out to be? 3 weeks had passed since Lisa last saw Robert Chen at the courthouse, and her world was slowly falling apart. What started as 3 simple complaints had turned into something much bigger and scarier. Lisa sat across from her lawyer, James Patterson, in his downtown office, and the news he had for her wasn't good. Lisa, I finally found out who Robert Chen is, James said, sliding a thin file across his desk. And we have a serious problem. Lisa opened the file with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Robert Chen's basic information, but it was enough to make her blood run cold. He works for Internal Affairs? She whispered. Not just works for them, James said grimly. He's the Deputy Director of Internal Affairs for the entire Metropolitan Police Department. He's also a former federal prosecutor who specializes in police corruption cases. Lisa felt like she was going to be sick. All those times she had called him a nobody. All those insults about desk jockeys and bureaucrats. She had been talking to one of the most powerful people in police oversight. How is that possible? She asked. I've never seen him at any department meetings or events. That's because he keeps a very low profile, James explained. He's known for working quietly and building airtight cases before anyone realizes they're being investigated. By the time officers know he's looking at them, it's usually too late. Lisa thought back to all their conversations at the courthouse. Robert Chen had asked her very specific questions about following orders and questioning authority. At the time, she had thought he was just some nobody trying to sound important. Now she realized he had been carefully probing her attitudes and methods. James, how much trouble am I in? Her lawyer looked at her seriously. Lisa, in the past week I've learned that Internal Affairs has been investigating you for 6 months. They have security camera footage from multiple arrests, witness statements from dozens of people, and they've been reviewing every report you've filed in the past 3 years. Lisa's hands started to shake. 6 months? How is that possible? I would have known if Internal Affairs was investigating me. That's exactly why Robert Chen is so effective, James said. He doesn't announce his investigations. He works quietly, gathering evidence piece by piece until he has enough to take action. The implications were starting to sink in. Every conversation Lisa had with Robert Chen, every dismissive comment she had made, every time she had bragged about doing whatever it took to arrest criminals, he had been building a case against her. What kind of evidence are we talking about? Lisa asked. James pulled out another folder. Security camera footage that shows you using excessive force during arrests. Witness statements from store owners and bystanders who saw you threaten suspects. Financial records that show some irregularities in your overtime reporting. And most importantly, testimony from other officers. Other officers? What other officers? Your partner Mike Torres was interviewed last week. So were 3 other officers from your precinct. Robert Chen has been talking to everyone who has worked with you. Lisa felt betrayed. Mike Torres had been her partner for 2 years. They had always had each other's backs. What did Mike tell them? I don't know the details, but my sources say he was very cooperative. Lisa, when Internal Affairs interviews police officers about their colleagues, they usually know a lot more than they let on. Mike probably thought it was better to be honest than to lie and make things worse for himself. Lisa stood up and started pacing around James's office. This is insane. I'm being destroyed by some guy I had never even heard of until a month ago. Lisa, sit down. We need to talk about your options. She sat back down, but her leg was bouncing nervously under the table. What options? Well, the first thing you need to understand is that this investigation is much bigger than just you. Internal Affairs has been looking at corruption and misconduct throughout your precinct. Several officers are being investigated and some have already been charged with crimes. Charged with crimes? What kind of crimes? Falsifying reports, evidence tampering, civil rights violations. Lisa, this isn't just about police discipline anymore. This is a criminal investigation. Lisa felt the room spinning around her. When she had first received the complaints about excessive force, she had thought it was just routine paperwork that would go away after a hearing. She never imagined it could lead to criminal charges. James, I need you to be honest with me, based on what you know about their evidence. What are the chances I get charged with a crime? James was quiet for a long time. Lisa, based on what I'm hearing, I think criminal charges are very likely. The question is what charges and how serious they are. Over the next few days, Lisa's situation continued to get worse. She was called into her captain's office and told she was being placed on administrative leave, while the internal affairs investigation continued. Her badge and gun were taken away and she was forbidden from entering the police station. Captain Rodriguez, her captain said, I want you to know that this decision comes from way above my level. I don't have any choice in the matter. Lisa had known Captain Johnson for 8 years. He had always supported her and defended her aggressive policing style. The fact that even he couldn't help her showed how serious this investigation had become. Captain, can you tell me anything about what they're looking at? Captain Johnson looked uncomfortable. Lisa, I've been told not to discuss the investigation with you, but I will say this. If you have anything you need to get off your chest, now might be the time to do it. These internal affairs investigations don't go away, and they don't get smaller. They only get bigger. As Lisa cleaned out her desk, she noticed that other officers were avoiding her. People who had been friendly colleagues for years now barely made eye contact with her. Word had clearly gotten around that she was under serious investigation. Her partner, Mike Torres, was the hardest to face. When she saw him in the hallway, he looked genuinely sad. Lisa, I'm sorry about all this, he said quietly. Mike, what did you tell them when they interviewed you? Mike looked around to make sure nobody was listening. Lisa, they already knew everything. They had security footage, witness statements, documentation of things I had forgotten about. They weren't asking me to tell them what happened. They were asking me to confirm what they already knew. So you threw me under the bus? I told them the truth, Mike said. Lisa, they gave me 2 choices. I could cooperate with their investigation and keep my job and pension, or I could lie to protect you and lose everything. I have a family to think about. Lisa understood, but it still hurt. Mike had been present during some of her more questionable arrests. His testimony would be damaging. That evening, Lisa sat in her apartment trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 6 months ago, she had been a respected detective with a clean record and a bright future. Now she was suspended from the police force and facing possible criminal charges. She thought about all her interactions with Robert Chen. How had she missed the signs that he was someone important? Looking back, there had been clues. The way he asked specific probing questions. The way he took detailed notes about everything she said. The way he never seemed intimidated by her aggressive attitude. But he had looked so ordinary. His gray suit was worn, his shoes were scuffed, and he had the quiet demeanor of a clerk or accountant. Lisa had been fooled by appearances, and now she was paying the price for her assumptions. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was James Patterson. Lisa, we need to meet tomorrow morning. I just got a call from the prosecutor's office. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. What kind of call? They want to schedule a meeting to discuss possible charges against you. Lisa, this means the criminal investigation is moving forward. After she hung up the phone, Lisa sat in the dark thinking about Robert Chen's last words to her at the courthouse. He had said it wasn't too late to make the right choice, to tell the truth instead of continuing down the path she was on. At the time, she had laughed at him and called him a nobody. Now she wondered if he had been giving her a chance to come clean and cooperate with the investigation. If she had taken his advice, maybe things would be different now. But she had been too arrogant to listen. She had been so sure that her connections and her lawyer could make any problems disappear. She had underestimated the quiet man in the gray suit, and now it looked like that mistake was going to cost her everything. The next morning, Lisa met with James Patterson at his office. The prosecutor had agreed to a meeting to discuss Lisa's situation, but James warned her that it probably wasn't good news. Lisa, when prosecutors call meetings like this, It usually means they're confident they have enough evidence to get convictions. They might offer you a plea bargain, but it will probably involve you admitting guilt and accepting significant punishment. What kind of punishment are we talking about? Prison time is possible. You'll definitely lose your job and your pension. You might face civil lawsuits from the people you arrested, and you'll probably never be able to work in law enforcement again. Lisa stared out the window at the city she had spent 12 years protecting. In a few hours, she would sit across from prosecutors and learn exactly how much evidence Robert Chen had gathered against her. The nobody in the gray suit had turned out to be the most dangerous person she had ever encountered. And the worst part was, she had done it all to herself through her own arrogance and assumptions about who was important and who wasn't. As she prepared to face the consequences of her actions, Lisa couldn't help but think about what might have happened if she had treated Robert Chen with respect from the beginning. If she had listened to his questions and taken his advice seriously, but it was too late for second thoughts now. The investigation was moving forward, and Lisa Rodriguez was about to learn just how thorough and devastating a quiet, methodical investigation could be. The meeting with the prosecutors was even worse than Lisa had imagined. She sat in a sterile conference room at the district attorney's office, flanked by her lawyer James Patterson, facing three serious-looking prosecutors who had laid out evidence against her like pieces of a puzzle. Assistant District Attorney Karen Walsh was leading the prosecution. She was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being tough on police corruption cases. Detective Rodriguez, Ada Walsh began, "We've been investigating allegations of misconduct in your precinct for the past 8 months. What started as a few complaints about excessive force has uncovered a pattern of behavior that we believe constitutes criminal activity." Lisa tried to maintain her composure, but her hands were sweating under the table. "I've always followed proper procedures and department policy." Ada Walsh opened a thick folder and pulled out several photographs. "These are screenshots from security camera footage taken during your arrests of Thomas Wright, Maria Santos, and David Kim. In each case, the footage shows you using force that goes well beyond what was necessary to control the situation." Lisa looked at the photos and felt her stomach drop. The images clearly showed her grabbing suspects roughly, throwing them against vehicles and applying handcuffs with unnecessary force. What had felt justified in the moment looked brutal and excessive when captured on camera. Furthermore, Ada Walsh continued, "We have evidence that you falsified your police reports about these incidents. In each case, you claim the suspects were resisting arrest and posed a threat to your safety. The video evidence contradicts these claims." James Patterson leaned forward. "My client was making split-second decisions in potentially dangerous situations. Police officers are trained to neutralize threats quickly to protect themselves and the public. Mr. Patterson, we understand the challenges of police work," Ada Walsh replied. "But this investigation has revealed a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond appropriate use of force." She pulled out another set of documents. "We've also discovered irregularities in Detective Rodriguez's overtime reporting. Over the past 2 years, she claimed over $15,000 in overtime pay for hours that we can prove she didn't work." Lisa's face went pale. She had occasionally padded her overtime reports, figuring it was harmless since she worked so many unpaid hours anyway. She never thought anyone would check the records that carefully. "That's not criminal," Lisa said defensively. "That's just a paperwork error. Detective Rodriguez, falsifying government documents is a felony. Stealing taxpayer money through fraudulent overtime claims is theft. These are serious criminal charges." Ada Walsh spread out more documents across the table. "But what concerns us most is the evidence we found of civil rights violations. We have testimony from 12 different suspects who say you threatened them during arrests, used racial slurs, and told them they would never win if they filed complaints against you. Those people are criminals," Lisa said, her voice rising. "You're going to take the word of drug dealers and thieves over a police officer with 12 years of service?" "Detective Rodriguez," Ada Walsh said calmly, "we're taking the word of 12 different people who don't know each other, whose stories corroborate each other, and whose accounts are supported by physical evidence and witness testimony." Lisa felt trapped. Every excuse she tried to make was met with more evidence. The prosecutors had clearly done their homework. James Patterson tried to regain control of the meeting. "What are you offering my client?" Ada Walsh exchanged glances with the other prosecutors. Detective Rodriguez, we're prepared to offer you a plea agreement. You would plead guilty to falsifying police reports, theft of government funds, and civil rights violations. In exchange, you would receive 5 years in prison, lose your job and pension, and be banned from working in law enforcement. Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. 5 years in prison? For doing my job? Detective Rodriguez, you weren't doing your job, Ada Walsh said firmly. You were abusing your authority and violating people's constitutional rights. If this case goes to trial and you're convicted on all charges, you could face 15 to 20 years in prison. The room was silent for a long moment. Lisa tried to process what she was hearing. A few months ago, she had been a confident police officer with a solid career. Now prosecutors were offering her 5 years in prison as a generous deal. I need time to think about this, Lisa said. You have 1 week, Ada Walsh replied. After that, the offer is withdrawn and we proceed to trial. As they left the prosecutor's office, Lisa felt numb. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't going to go away. She wasn't going to be able to talk her way out of it or use her connections to make it disappear. James, what do you think I should do? Her lawyer was quiet as they walked to the parking garage. Lisa, I have to be honest with you. They have a very strong case. The security camera footage alone is damaging, but combined with the financial irregularities and witness testimony, a jury would probably convict you. So you think I should take the plea deal? I think you should seriously consider it. 5 years is a lot better than 15 or 20. That evening, Lisa sat in her apartment staring at the walls. Her phone had been ringing all day with calls from reporters who had somehow learned about the investigation. Her neighbors were avoiding her, and she had seen news vans parked outside her building. She thought about calling some of her friends on the police force, but she realized she didn't know who she could trust anymore. If other officers were cooperating with the investigation, anyone could be feeding information to internal affairs. The next morning, Lisa woke up to find her picture on the front page of the local newspaper. The headline read, "Detective Charged in Corruption Probe." The article described her as part of a larger investigation into misconduct in the police department. Her phone started ringing immediately. Reporters, lawyers, people from her past. Everyone wanted to talk to her about the charges. Lisa turned off her phone and closed the curtains in her apartment. Later that day, she received a call from Tony Martinez, her union representative. Lisa, I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk. Tony, can the union help me with this? There was a long pause. Lisa, the union can provide some legal support, but we can't defend officers who have committed crimes. If you take a plea deal, the union will have to distance itself from your case. Another door was closing. Even her union, which had always backed police officers no matter what, was abandoning her. Tony, what about my pension? If I'm forced to resign, do I lose everything? If you're convicted of felonies related to your job, you lose your pension. That's department policy. Lisa hung up the phone feeling more isolated than ever. She had spent 12 years building a career and a reputation, and it was all disappearing in a matter of weeks. That afternoon, she decided to drive by the precinct where she had worked. She couldn't go inside because of her suspension, but she wanted to see the place where she had spent so much of her life. As she sat in her car across the street from the police station, she saw several of her former colleagues walking in and out of the building. None of them noticed her, and she realized that her career in law enforcement was already over, even if she hadn't officially resigned yet. She thought about Robert Chen and wondered if he was in the building at that moment, working on other cases, building other investigations. She had dismissed him as a nobody, but he had systematically destroyed her career without ever raising his voice or making threats. Lisa's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Detective Rodriguez, this is Robert Chen. I know this is a difficult time for you. If you would like to talk, I'm available. Lisa stared at the message for a long time. The man who had investigated her, who had gathered all the evidence that was now being used against her, was offering to talk to her. Part of her wanted to ignore the message. What could Robert Chen possibly have to say to her now? But another part of her was curious. Throughout this entire ordeal, she had never really understood who Robert Chen was or why he had targeted her. She typed back, "Why would you want to talk to me?" The response came quickly. "Because I think there are things you deserve to understand about this investigation and decisions you still need to make." Lisa sat in her car for another hour, thinking about everything that had happened. She had 1 week to decide whether to accept the plea deal or go to trial. Either way, her life as she knew it was over. But maybe, just maybe, talking to Robert Chen would help her understand how she had ended up in this situation. And perhaps more importantly, how she should handle what came next. She typed one more message. When and where? The response was immediate. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Park East entrance. I'll be on the bench by the fountain. Lisa put her phone away and started her car. Tomorrow she would face the man who had quietly and methodically brought down her career. The nobody in the gray suit who had turned out to be anything but a nobody. As she drove home, Lisa realized that this conversation might be her last chance to understand what had really happened to her, and why her assumptions about power and authority had been so dangerously wrong. Lisa arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early. She wanted time to compose herself before facing Robert Chen again. The last time she had seen him, she had been full of confidence and contempt. Now she was a suspended police officer facing criminal charges, and he held all the cards. She found the bench by the fountain and sat down to wait. The park was quiet on this Tuesday afternoon, with just a few joggers and dog walkers around. Lisa watched the water flow from the fountain and tried to calm her nerves. At exactly 2 o'clock, she saw Robert Chen walking toward her. He was wearing the same type of gray suit she remembered from the courthouse, and he moved with the same careful, measured pace. But now Lisa saw him differently. This wasn't some nobody trying to look important. This was a man who had spent months methodically building a case that would destroy her career. "Detective Rodriguez," Robert said as he approached the bench. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "I'm not a detective anymore," Lisa replied. "I'm suspended, remember?" Robert sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving space between them. "How are you holding up?" Lisa almost laughed. "How do you think I'm holding up?" "I'm facing 5 years in prison because of your investigation." Robert was quiet for a moment, watching the fountain. "Is that why you think you're facing prison time?" "Because of my investigation? What do you mean?" Robert turned to look at her directly. "Detective Rodriguez, Lisa, you're facing prison time because of your actions over the past several years. My investigation simply documented what you had already done." Lisa felt anger rising in her chest. "Your investigation turned routine police work into criminal charges. You took situations out of context and made them look worse than they were." "Did I?" Robert asked calmly. "Let me ask you something. When you threw Thomas Wright against your patrol car during that traffic stop, was he resisting arrest?" Lisa hesitated. "He was being uncooperative. The security camera footage shows him standing with his hands visible, speaking calmly to you. At what point did his behavior justify the force you used?" Lisa didn't answer immediately. She had watched the footage herself and she knew it didn't look good. "Police work is complicated," she said finally. "Split-second decisions, dangerous situations. People who weren't there can't understand what it's like." Robert nodded. "You're absolutely right. Police work is incredibly difficult and dangerous. That's why departments have policies and procedures to guide officers in making those split-second decisions. Tell me, Lisa, when you falsified your overtime reports, was that also a split-second decision made under pressure?" Lisa felt heat rising in her face. "That was different. How was it different?" "Look, every cop works unpaid overtime. The paperwork and bureaucracy never stops. Sometimes we round up our hours to account for all the work we do off the clock." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "Lisa, over the past 2 years you claimed $15,000 in overtime pay for hours you didn't work. That's not rounding up. That's theft." Lisa stood up from the bench, feeling cornered. "Why are you doing this to me? What did I ever do to you?" Robert remained seated, his voice still calm. "You didn't do anything to me personally, but you violated the rights of citizens I was sworn to protect. You stole money from taxpayers I serve, and you corrupted the badge that good police officers wear with pride." "I kept criminals off the streets," Lisa said, her voice rising. "I protected the public from dangerous people. Did you?" Robert asked. "Because our investigation found that 12 of your arrests in the past 2 years resulted in charges being dropped or convictions being overturned due to misconduct. 12 criminals walked free because your actions made it impossible to prosecute them properly." Lisa felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She hadn't known about the overturned convictions. Robert continued, "When you use excessive force, when you violate constitutional rights, when you lie in your reports, you don't just hurt the people you arrest. You hurt every case the department tries to build. You make it harder for honest cops to do their jobs. Lisa sat back down, feeling defeated. So what happens now? You've destroyed my career. You're sending me to prison. Are you happy? Robert's expression softened slightly. Lisa, I'm not happy about any of this. I've been investigating police misconduct for 15 years, and it never gets easier. Every case like yours represents a failure of training, supervision, and accountability. Then why do it? Robert was quiet for a moment, looking at the fountain again. Because someone has to. Because when police officers abuse their authority, it hurts everyone. The victims, the community, and good cops who do their jobs the right way. Lisa looked at Robert more carefully. For the first time, she saw something other than the quiet investigator. There was sadness in his eyes and weariness that came from years of difficult work. How long have you known about my activities? She asked. We opened a file on you 8 months ago after we received the first complaints. But Lisa, those complaints didn't come out of nowhere. The patterns we found suggest that this behavior has been going on for years. 8 months, Lisa repeated. You've been watching me for 8 months and I never knew. That's the point, Robert said. Most investigations fail because they're too obvious. Officers change their behavior. Evidence gets destroyed. Witnesses get intimidated. Effective investigations require patience and discretion. Lisa thought about all the interactions she had with Robert at the courthouse. When you talked to me during the hearing, you were still investigating me. I was giving you opportunities to be honest, Robert said. Every question I asked, every conversation we had, I was hoping you would choose to tell the truth and cooperate with the investigation. And if I had? Things would be very different now. Officers who cooperate with internal affairs investigations, who take responsibility for their actions and help us understand systemic problems, usually face much lighter consequences. Lisa felt a wave of regret wash over her. But I called you a nobody. I was rude and dismissive. Yes, you were, Robert said without anger. But that wasn't what convinced me you were guilty. Your attitude told me something about your character, but the evidence told me about your actions. They sat in silence for several minutes, both watching the fountain and the people walking through the park. Robert, Lisa said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. That first day at the courthouse when you were sitting alone reading papers, did you know then that you were going to arrest me? Robert considered the question carefully. I knew we had enough evidence to recommend charges. Whether those charges would be filed depended on the prosecutor's office and what additional evidence we gathered. But you knew my career was over. I knew that if the evidence supported criminal charges, yes, your career in law enforcement would be over. Lisa nodded slowly. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in completely. What do you think I should do about the plea deal? Robert was quiet for a long time. Lisa, I can't give you legal advice. That's between you and your lawyer. I'm not asking for legal advice. I'm asking what you think I should do. Robert looked at her directly. I think you should take responsibility for your actions. I think you should consider the impact your behavior has had on other people. And I think you should make whatever decision allows you to live with yourself. Lisa felt tears starting to form in her eyes. For months she had been angry and defiant, blaming everyone else for her problems. But sitting here with Robert Chen, the man who had quietly and methodically documented her misconduct, she finally understood that she was responsible for her own downfall. Robert, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just sorry that I got caught, but sorry for what I did. Sorry for the people I hurt. Robert nodded. I believe you are. And that's important, Lisa. Taking responsibility is the first step toward making things right. They talked for another hour. Robert explained more about the investigation, about the other officers who were facing charges, and about the reforms the department was implementing to prevent future misconduct. As the conversation was ending, Lisa had one more question. Robert, why do you do this job? It must be horrible. Investigating your own colleagues, destroying careers. Robert stood up from the bench and straightened his gray suit jacket. Because someone has to hold the line, Lisa. Police officers have tremendous power and authority. When that power is abused, someone has to be accountable for investigating it and making sure justice is done. He paused and looked at her one more time. And because I believe in what police work should be. I believe in officers who protect and serve all citizens fairly and justly. Every corrupt cop we remove from the force makes room for someone better. As Robert walked away, Lisa remained on the bench thinking about everything he had said. The man she had dismissed as a nobody had turned out to be someone who cared deeply about justice and accountability. His quiet demeanor and modest appearance had hidden a fierce dedication to doing what was right, even when it was difficult. 3 days later, Lisa met with her lawyer and accepted the plea deal. She would serve 5 years in prison, lose her job and pension, and never work in law enforcement again. It was a harsh consequence, but she knew it was fair. At her sentencing hearing, Lisa saw Robert Chen sitting in the back of the courtroom, just as he had been during her first disciplinary hearing months earlier. But this time, she understood who he was and what he represented. As she was led away to begin her prison sentence, Lisa thought about all the assumptions she had made about power and authority. She had believed that influence and connections were what mattered, that loud voices and aggressive tactics were signs of strength. But Robert Chen had shown her a different kind of power, the quiet strength of someone who did his job thoroughly and fairly, regardless of how others perceived him. He had brought down her entire network of corruption without ever raising his voice or making threats. The nobody in the gray suit had taught Lisa the most important lesson of her life. Real authority doesn't need to announce itself, and the most dangerous opponents are often the ones you never see coming. Years later, when Lisa was released from prison, she would think often about her conversation with Robert Chen in the park. His words about taking responsibility and making things right had stayed with her throughout her incarceration. She never worked in law enforcement again, but she did find a way to use her experience to help others. Lisa began speaking to police academies and community groups about the dangers of corruption and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. And sometimes, when she spoke to young police officers about integrity and justice, she would tell them about a quiet man in a gray suit who had shown her that true strength comes from doing what's right, even when no one is watching.